have to be afraid of anything, 'cause you know the truth, and the truth is love, yes it is. Wasn't what they said to you.
Welcome to the Bassline. Dr. Ron Elfenbein is a Johns Hopkins trained physician who finds himself in the crosshairs of a weaponized Department of Justice. He is now facing a severe legal penalty based on an absurd compilation of charges when the man has done nothing other than fulfill his oath as a doctor. It is my privilege to welcome to the Bassline the distinguished Dr. Ron Elfenbein. How are you this afternoon, Dr. Elfenbein?
I'm well, thank you, Jeremiah. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure and a privilege, and this is an emergency episode, I guess you could say, because as I mentioned, this gentleman, Dr. Elfenbein, is in the crosshairs of the Department of Justice, and when you hear the details of this case, I'm sure you will be struck by the absolute absurdity of what he is facing, but it's very serious. So we're going to get into the details of this case in a moment, but Dr. Elfenbein, if you could, tell us about your credentials and your background, just so people know the type of distinguished doctor that is being threatened and being persecuted in the way in which you are.
Well, thank you for the kind introduction. So I'm a Johns Hopkins trained emergency medicine, board certified emergency medicine doctor. I grew up in New York. I went to med school in New York. I went to college at Cornell University. I have 4 children. My wife's a physician. During COVID, I was actually awarded a citation from our governor, personal citation. He came to one of my facilities and handed me a citation for all the work that I did during COVID. I'm an avowed, open and outspoken Republican, but our Democrat-controlled legislature voted to give me a citation as well during COVID for all the work I did. And then our state medical society named me its Person of the Year for all the work I did during COVID. And I got that award actually after I was indicted by the Department of Justice.
Wow.
So, I think that sort of speaks to my character a little bit. I've never done anything wrong in my entire life. I mean, I don't even have a parking ticket to my name. So, it's kind of crazy. I did a lot of work for NASA. I used to did a lot of work with the United States Secret Service. In fact, I was at the Salt Lake City Olympic Games as part of the Secret Service contingent for the entirety of the games. They asked me to come out there and to do that, to be part with the Secret Service, to take care of all the federal agents, over 5,000 federal agents that were out there. So I was out there providing medical care for all these federal agents. It was right after September 11th. So, security was very high.
Right.
So I think that, that's probably a good summary, at least to some extent, of my background.
Yeah, so thank you for that. And let's dive right into these outrageous charges that you're facing. I mean, offhand, it makes absolutely no sense to anyone who hears the circumstances that you're facing. I mean, they're charging you with a penalty of potentially 50 years in prison for miscoding things. I mean, please explain all the details. It's just mind-numbing what's happening to you.
Yes, and thank you for framing it that way, because it absolutely is mind-numbing. It's a good way to say it. So just so your audience understands, the Department of Justice, the weaponized Biden Department of Justice, charged me with 5 counts of healthcare fraud. Now, each of these counts represents a real human being. I just want to make that very clear, because typically healthcare fraud and fraud in general, certainly on a federal level, involves billing for things that don't exist or didn't actually happen. But these are real human beings. They're all real people. They were all seen. They were all treated. They were all tested. The government doesn't allege otherwise, by the way. They just allege that we chose the wrong code, of which there are over 69,000 codes to choose from. Now, this is in the context of a pandemic when we had seen over 100,000 patients at my clinics in the time frame of the indictment, over 100,000. The government chose 5. They never even had a professional coder look at those 5 charts, just government lawyers. And now you may ask yourself, what does a government lawyer know about coding and billing? And my answer would be absolutely nothing. They don't know anything about it. They never even went to the trouble of hiring a professional coder to look through these charts to say, was this coding reasonable? Now, I did at trial. I hired a guy who was the past president of the American Association of Professional Coders. So he's not some, Yahoo. He's a guy who has serious credentials. And he went through not just 5 charts, he went through hundreds of charts. And he said they were all coded appropriately. In fact, some of them may have actually been undercoded. And I want to make something clear. So, during the pandemic, I owned a company, and we ran an urgent care center, and we very quickly went from 1 urgent care to 8. So we went from 6 employees to over 300 at the height of the pandemic. I didn't see a single one of these patients that the government's coming after me for. I didn't touch them. I didn't see them. I didn't talk to them. I had nurse practitioners and PAs who worked for me who saw the patients. They did the coding. They did the billing. And we had a third-party billing company. Now, I did put out recommendations, and I said, here's what I think you should do, and here's how I think you should be billing, because there's a very strict criteria for how you bill. And I went through that criteria, and I came up with what I thought was reasonable. Now, I would say, if this was truly about billing and coding, don't you think, Jeremiah, like any reasonable human being, the reaction to what you think is an overbilling would be to just pick up the phone and say, could you explain this?
Sure.
I mean, if you go to the grocery store and you're buying soda and they what you think is an overcharging you for soda, you're going to not call the federal government. You're going to say, can I speak to the manager, please? Or can I speak to the person who just checked me out because I think you overcharged me?
Yeah.
That's what a reasonable human being would do. But that's not what the government did. They never approached me. They never reached out to me. There's probably 17 different ways they could have gotten in touch with me. They didn't use any of them. Instead, they indicted me without ever reaching out and asking for an explanation over 5 patients that are real people that were seen, that were taken care of, because they say that somebody else, not even me, somebody else chose the wrong code out of 69,000 possible codes to pick. That's how ridiculous this is. And even further than that, they said that we overcharged. We chose the wrong code. We were charging too high a level. So the difference between the code that we picked and the next lowest code is about $50 per person. So the government is trying to, the Biden Department of Justice is trying to throw me in jail for 50 years and millions of dollars in restitution over what amounts to a $250 billing dispute. I would ask anybody, in what galaxy does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that is perfectly unclear to me is if they're saying that there was an error. I mean, it sounds basically they're trying to charge you as though you had committed a heinous crime for what is tantamount to a clerical error. I mean, do you have any idea where do they come up with the 50 years from? I mean, it just
So it's because the healthcare fraud statute, every count counts for up to 10 years per count, and 10 times 5 is 50. That's where they come up with the 50 years. Now, to your point, the Biden Department of Justice had all the Epstein files in its possession and didn't go after a single human being who molested children, right? Who murdered children, who did horrible and heinous things. They didn't indict, make public, to go after any of those people. Nor did they go after any of these people that you hear about with this real fraud that's been going on with billions of dollars in losses. No, they chose to come after me. Now, that begs the question, why would they choose me? Why would they come after me? And I'm certainly happy to get into that, why I believe that they weaponized the Department of Justice against me. But this whole thing is just so ridiculous. And thank God the judge was paying attention, because the chief judge of the state of Maryland, and even during a pretrial conference, said the whole case looks like a case of, quote, shoot first and ask questions later, because the Department of Justice under the Biden administration had done little to no investigation, And they even got my name wrong on the charging documents.
Wow.
On all the documents they filed with the courts, my name was improperly written. Every single time, every paper, everything. They had the wrong person. Just to show you how little bit of a workup. Don't you think that they, at least if they're going to go after you criminally, should at least know the name of the person that they're indicting?
Yeah, so let's get into this question of why you. Is it because you were treating people in a manner that would possibly undermine the basis for the emergency use authorization?
So, great question, and I think that's exactly right. First of all, I became a national figure because I was on TV probably at least weekly, if not more often, on CBS, on Fox, on ABC, on NBC, CNN, SkyMax, Newsmax, you name the outlet, I was on it. And I was talking about COVID. I was talking about, how to survive and what the news was saying, stuff like that. And then when monoclonal antibodies came out, I started to speak out about how wonderful these things were because I knew how efficacious they were and how they were saving people's lives. And the government was making it incredibly hard for people to get these drugs. So I set up clinics. Now, I don't know anything about infusions, okay? I'm an ER doctor. You get shot, you get stabbed, you're having a heart attack, I'm your guy. But I'm not the person who infuses people. I don't know anything about that. The government was making it incredibly hard for people to get this life-saving drug. So I said, I'm going to take my knowledge and I'm going to teach myself what I need to learn about this, and I'm going to set up a clinic. So I set up 2 of them. And I would have set up 100 of them if I could have found enough people to work and enough facilities and all that. But I set up 2 of them. And we very quickly became the largest supplier of this life-saving drug in the entire state of Maryland, and I believe in the entire Mid-Atlantic region. So that's Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, all these states. I think we were the largest supplier. We surpassed Johns Hopkins, University of Maryland. We were the busiest supplier in this entire area. And the reason is because I made it simple for people. If they qualified for the drug, we were going to give it to them because it potentially would save their life. And I want to just go on. I've never seen anything like that in my entire life, how wonderful these drugs were. So I was out there talking about how great these drugs are. I was on the news, and then the Biden administration started making it even more difficult for people to get this drug. They federalized the distribution of it, and they said, we're going to control the distribution. And overnight, literally overnight, Jeremiah, it created artificial shortages. So if you'd ask for 100 doses, you were lucky if you got 60 or 70. And certain states couldn't get them at all, like Florida. And it just so happens that most of those states, if not all of those states, that they couldn't get them happened to be red. Now, I went on TV and I started to say, what the hell's going on here? This is crazy. And I was also attacking the vaccine narrative. I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Why are we just talking about vaccinating everybody when we have this alternative medicine, which is by the way, just so your listeners understand, this is not some experimental treatment. Monoclonal antibodies, the technology has been around since the mid to early 70s, and we use it to treat all sorts of things in medicine when we have been for the last 50 years. So it's not like the mRNA vaccine, which was brand new. This has been around, it's been tried and tested and proven, and it's incredibly safe with little to no side effects. And I've witnessed this firsthand because I was there in these clinics giving it to patients, and every one of them got better. So the Biden administration then said, well, we're going to start injecting and using equity as a means to determine distribution. And I was like, what the hell is this? First of all, nobody can define what that term means. And second of all, it certainly has no place in a discussion about where a life-saving medication should be sent. So I started to question that. And then in late December of 2021, they said, well, we're going to shut the whole program down. So I went on Fox News and I said, the Biden administration is going to kill people and they don't know what they're doing. And I mean, if you Google my name and Fox News, you'll see the article, you'll see what I said. And then about a couple of days later, Newsmax called me and said, that was a pretty inflammatory article. We'd like to have you on. I went on Newsmax and I reiterated what I had just said. And then I went on a couple of other programs and did the same thing. And it turned a couple weeks to a month later, they reinstated the program and allowed us to start infusing again. But then very quickly, into 2022, each one of those monoclonal antibodies got pulled off the market, and you can no longer get them, by the way. 4 months later, I was on Fox News on late December 2021. 4 months later, out of the blue, I find myself indicted on healthcare fraud charges with no investigation. No one called me. No one emailed me. No one faxed me. No one asked me any questions. I was just a victim of this federal healthcare fraud indictment that just came out of left field, that even the judge said essentially no investigation had been done, because he said this looks like a case of shoot first and ask questions later.
Yeah, well, I certainly hope these charges get dropped and you're completely exonerated as quickly as possible. Could you give us... Go ahead.
No, sorry. I was going to say thank you. And I actually was exonerated. So I took it to trial, and because I had done nothing wrong, and I wasn't going to bow down to the weaponized Biden DOJ and say, I'm going to admit to something I didn't do. That's crazy. And they had no evidence. So I take it to, literally no evidence. I take it to trial, and the chief judge, who's the chief judge of the state of Maryland, issues a 93-page opinion. And just to put that into context, the Supreme Court doesn't issue 93-page opinions. And he went through methodically and destroyed the government's case and acquitted me of all charges and granted me a new trial in case the government appealed. Now, my lawyers tell me that is so exceedingly rare that they don't remember a single time that this has happened in their entire careers. Now, I just want to read a couple quotes because the judge's opinion was so striking. And just so people understand, this was not a right-wing judge. This guy was appointed by President Obama. And, I mean, it was so striking what he did. Here's a couple quotes. There can, of course, be no crimes if the defendant complied with those rules. The evidence, and these are all quotes, by the way, The evidence weighs so heavily in favor of the defendant that it would be unjust to enter judgment against him. The government did not carry its burden, and no reasonable jury could have so concluded. And I mean, it goes on and on and on with those type of quotes in 93 pages. So he acquits me, and he says, you're innocent, you didn't do anything wrong. Essentially, this case should never have been brought. There's no evidence. You're done. Literally, as they're packing up their boxes to leave their offices because Trump's about to be inaugurated, the Biden Department of Justice decides to appeal this. So now I'm in the position of finding myself having to face a new trial under the Trump administration because it started under the Biden Department of Justice, and it's just being continued now. So I've already been exonerated. I'm trying to find someone in the Trump administration who can look at this objectively and say, this case has already been adjudicated. It's a clear case of weaponization. Even the chief federal judge of the state of Maryland basically said that. We should just walk away from this. This is crazy.
Yeah, the term Kafkaesque, which I saw Dr. Drew used in your interview on his program, is perfectly appropriate. Kafka's my favorite fictional writer, and this is an example of a Kafkaesque situation, no doubt. I would like to hear your perspective 6 years down the road now. What is your view of the pandemic that some people call the plandemic? There's the whole question of gain of function research that might have been at the root of all of this. There's the PCR fraud. There's so many components. What are some of your general thoughts about the COVID event?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you framing it like that. And actually, there's one other thing I didn't mention before I get to your question.
Yes.
Just to add to this Kafkaesque / Twilight Zone-esque nightmare, the American Medical Association, I'm not a member of the American Medical Association, but they wrote an amicus brief, which is a friend of the court brief, basically saying that I did not break any of these rules that the government's accusing me of breaking. What's so striking about that is the AMA writes those rules. The AMA writes the rules that the government's accusing me of breaking, and they came to my defense. And they never do that, by the way, and I'm not even a member. And they said I didn't break the rules, but yet the government is still coming after me. It just doesn't make any sense. Now, to your question, Jeremiah, I've initially I was like probably 99% of the population. I was like hook, line, and sinker. I believed what I was being told. I was pro-vaccine, pro-everything else. But then I very quickly began to question, because I consider myself a person of science, and I consider myself a logical person and someone who has the wherewithal and the capacity to think for myself. And, like when they started firing nurses who refused to get vaccinated because they had just had the disease, why on earth would they need to be vaccinated? And why are they being fired?
Right.
So I started to look into this more deeply and said, this doesn't make any sense. And then why is Pfizer not releasing the data for 75 years?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that doesn't make any sense. So I think that there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. There's a lot of fraud that was perpetrated on, I wouldn't even say the American people, because it was the entire world.
Yeah.
By these shysters and these awful, evil people. And that's what they are. They're evil. And, was there a real disease? Yes. I saw it myself. I mean, people had COVID, right? There was a real disease. But, do I believe that was manufactured in a lab? Absolutely. I think that's what everybody believes. Even the CIA said that. That was suppressed. I mean, these people lied to us again and again and again and again. And why would we trust anything they have to say?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I'm a chess instructor, and I use the analogy of a chess combination, which is, in chess, it's not just a matter of finding the right moves, it's a matter of finding the right moves in the right sequence. And if the initial move is wrong, well, the rest of the combination doesn't exist. And I use that in reference to claims like, you're not going to get COVID if you take these vaccinations. And then they say, oh, wait a second, actually, you have to take a booster. Oh, wait a second, you actually have to take endless boosters. So, things like that should undermine your faith in whoever is giving these recommendations or orders, because they're saying things that are fundamentally incorrect, and then we're supposed to proceed with following their instructions. But it shouldn't really work like that, I would say. I mean, once you've indicated you don't really know what you're talking about, or you're shooting from the hip, you're making things up as you go along, why should you maintain the air of someone who knows exactly what they're talking about and someone who's correct in what they're saying?
Absolutely. Your analogy is spot on about the chess. It's exactly right. Your opening move determines the rest of your strategy, and they were very smart and very methodical at what they did. I was actually having a conversation with someone a couple of months ago about that, and this person, we were getting very philosophical, and the person asked me, she stated actually, she said, I've always wondered how the Nazis were so good at being able to get people's neighbors to turn against them. They've lived next to these people for 100 years, and they're friends with these people. How did they get them to turn against them and turn them into the government? And this is exactly the same playbook. Now, I'm not conflating the two. Obviously, one was a genocidal, maniacal regime, and the other thing is just a evil government and an evil apparatus. I'm not suggesting there was genocidal intentions or anything, but that's exactly the same playbook. You create a boogeyman. You make anyone who disagrees with the fundamental flaws and the fundamental nonsense a boogeyman, and say that person's endangering everybody. They should be castigated from society. And all of a sudden, you have now neighbors calling on their own neighbors saying, "Oh, Bill's not wearing a mask, or Bill's out in public, doing something he shouldn't be doing, or whatever." Like, that's insane. But that's exactly what they did, and they did it very well.
Yeah,
and
go ahead.
Shame, the old saying, you fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you. We cannot let this happen again. We cannot allow this to happen again.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Yeah, there's so many psychological dynamics at play. I mean, you have just the herd mentality is just a big sort of feature of the whole thing. Then there's also this sort of psychological quality of hypervigilance. A lot of people have sort of an inner hypervigilance that was activated when they could report on other people for not wearing a mask and that type of thing. We're just approaching the halfway mark here of the program. It's 1:30 on the East Coast, and I want to quickly go through the means by which you can support this independent radio program, The Bassline. First of all, this Sunday, if you can join us at Rock Mill Fitness, that's 274 Lenox Avenue. We're going to have another 528 frequency jam. That is 3:30 p.m. And again, the address is 274 Lenox Avenue, Rock Mill Fitness. Please join us. It's a great time, and it's a great venue, and we'd love to see you there. Also, of course, this program is an affiliate of frontierfarm.com. That's FRONTIERPHARM.com. So frontierfarm.com. And the discount code is The Bassline, capital THE, space, capital BASSLINE. Also, we have IPTV, best deal in television viewing you could ever come across. And the website there is privateiptvaccess.com. And the code there is Hosea, capital J, capital HOSEA. Also, please subscribe to my Substack. That's jeremiahhosea.substack.com. Check out my music, including the theme song for this program, at jeremiahhosea.com. And of course, I'm a chess teacher, and my company is remotelearningchess.com. So please contact me for a chess lesson. If you have young people in your family, please sign them up for some lessons. And of course, you get a Bassline discount to go along with that. And if you'd like to call in the program, please do so. The number here is 888-874-4888, 888-874-4888 if you have a question for Dr. Elfenbein. And with all that being said, we're going to return to the conversation. Actually, let me mention one other thing, which is End All Tyranny. That's our community on X. They're trying to do away with communities on X, which is upsetting, but we're not finished yet. So we're going to have our community space tonight, as we always do, and it's the Bassline Extra. I'm not sure, Dr. Elfenbein, if you can join us at some point. I know you have young children that you have to take care of, but if you could join us at least for some time, we'd love to hear from you tonight. We start at 9 p.m. Eastern on X. But I would like to continue with the discussion about something we discuss here constantly, which is the COVID vaccines. I initially was opposed to the shots just on principle. I mean, so many features of it. Rush to the market, a cure that's whipped up for a disease that came out of nowhere, when of course we have so many diseases that remain without cures. It's a mystery to science. But then a disease comes out of nowhere and they just whip up a cure, and multiple corporations are able to simultaneously produce their equivalent of the COVID quote-unquote vaccines. And then I started to hear some things about, well, the potential harms of these vaccines. And I remember, for example, Dr. Sucharit Bhakti was saying that these shots were going to result in blood clots. And I remember it was pretty early on that J&J was temporarily suspended because of blood clots being observed. And there were so many other cases of blood clots. I know people who personally were hospitalized with blood clots, television figures such as Al Roker, the famous weatherman, hospitalized with blood clots, Deion Sanders. I mentioned some of these examples in my recent Substack article. But I had no idea that these shots were going to be so harmful. But it seems that they have inflicted an incredible amount of harm. I think the best proof of that would be the record-level source data of my friend John Bodwin, author of The Real CDC. If you're not familiar with that book, everyone please go to therealcdc.com. John's been a guest on this program twice. But I would say that by now we have several categories of data, that, and not just data, but information of all kinds that indicate that these shots were, one, ineffective in stopping COVID, and two, very harmful and in some cases fatal. As a matter of fact, I meant to mention earlier that I knew someone who was COVID shot injected and then still had to receive monoclonal antibodies to treat their COVID, the same COVID that they weren't protected from by the vaccine. So I found
right?
I found that interesting. But what are your thoughts about the COVID injections for one, and has your thinking about vaccination in general changed through this whole experience? Because I've had several doctors on this program who say they're reconsidering vaccines writ large through what they've learned through all of these events.
Yeah, so I think, the listeners should ask themselves, like, a couple things. One, these vaccines, as you said, Jeremiah, came out of nowhere, right? And the taxpayer footed the bill almost entirely, I believe.
Yeah.
I think it was 100%. It might have been, if it wasn't 100%, it was 90% of all the research that went into developing them. And yet 100% of the profits goes to Big Pharma.
Mm.
Now, you explain that to me. How is it possible that the taxpayers paid for the entirety of the research, or the vast majority of it, let's put it that way, and give them the benefit of the doubt, yet 100% of the profits go to Big Pharma?
Heck of a business model, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could get a business model like that, right? I mean, who doesn't? And monoclonal antibodies, which, let me just take a step back, because I don't know that everyone understands what these are.
Yeah.
So basically, if you imagine a virus particle, it's like, imagine like a tennis ball. I use that analogy all the time because it's the best one I can come up with. But let's just think about a tennis ball. Or you remember those koosh balls?
Yeah.
The little balls with the hairs coming off that makes the koosh sound when you pass them? That's
they were
even
fun.
a better one. So each one of those little things that sticks off that is a protein or a sugar that sticks off the end of the virus particle. And your body will recognize that as foreign, and it will produce an antibody in a lock and key mechanism. So just like an individual lock has an individual key, same thing. Your body will produce an antibody that fits exactly onto that protein. And each one of those proteins will help bind up that virus particle so that it can't infect you. Now, Jeremiah, if I were to give you COVID right now, if I came and injected you with COVID-19, you would get sick from it. And in about 2 to 3 weeks, your body would maximally produce all the antibodies that your body would produce to it. You'd max out in about 2 to 3 weeks. What monoclonal antibodies is the drug manufacturers have figured out which antibody is the best one against that particular strain, and they basically take that one and they replicate it over and over and over again. So it's mono, meaning one, clonal, meaning it's been cloned, antibody. So it's one antibody that your body would produce. It just replicates it a gazillion times. So basically, in 30 minutes, we infuse this through a vein. So it's basically, if you want to think about it, what your body would take about 3 weeks to produce, we can give you in 30 minutes. And you're basically one and done, and you're cured of your infection right then and there, essentially. It's incredibly efficacious. People would walk in, short of breath. They were blue in the face. They looked awful. They felt awful. You give them this stuff. Halfway through the infusion, they'd start to say, wow, I'm feeling much better. And they would walk out on their own 2 feet. They have to be wheelchaired in sometimes, and they could literally walk out on their own 2 feet. That's how miraculous this stuff was. I've never seen anything like it in my entire career in medicine. And you brought up something very important earlier. You said putting the emergency use authorization at risk. That's exactly what this did. So Secretary Kennedy has been out there beating the drum. He was on Joe Rogan. He was on Megyn Kelly. He's been on a number of other podcasts where he's talking about a little-known federal law that if there is an emergency use authorization for a vaccine against a virus, and there's something else that's proven efficacious against that virus, the emergency use authorization is lapsed. It's gone, which is why they had to beat down ivermectin and they had to beat down hydroxychloroquine, because they could not allow that to be shown to be efficacious, because if they did, the EUA for the vaccines would have disappeared, which means the vaccine would have disappeared. And I would argue that the monoclonal antibodies were even more efficacious because it's a one and done thing, and it takes 30 minutes. You infuse someone in 30 minutes and they're cured. So they had to beat this down. They had to shut me up. They had to silence me because this was a direct threat to the vaccine, 100%. And you're right. These vaccines caused all sorts of problems. They were rushed to the market. They never did what they were told. They kept See, remember, they kept moving the goalposts.
Yep.
I mean, everybody knows what a vaccine is supposed to do.
Yeah.
You don't have to be a doctor to understand what a vaccine is supposed to do. It's supposed to keep you from getting that illness. But then they said, oh, no, we never said that. We said it will keep you from being hospitalized.
Right.
And then they said, oh, well, you need a booster, as you said. Then you need another booster. Then you need another booster. They kept changing the definition and moving the goalposts. And, which is, again, antithetical to science and just wrong and evil. But that's what they kept doing. And they had this great cure that they refused to basically admit that it was a cure. And when you think about it, the drug companies make very little money from monoclonal antibodies, like very little.
Right.
They make all their money from vaccines, especially when the taxpayers pay for the entirety of the production of them. So your second half of your question was about vaccination in general. So, I think vaccines in general, like I'm not opposed to the idea of vaccination, because vaccinations, as I understand it, have saved a lot of lives and saved people from getting certain illnesses. But I think we take for granted in medicine that all these things that we do are done with good rationale and good reason. And I think some of that is a false representation. What I mean by that is, childhood vaccinations. I'm not suggesting people don't get their kids vaccinated, but the numbers have exploded, and a lot of the premise of what we give is based on pseudoscience or bad science. I think the definition of science, really, in my mind, is question everything and constantly be objective and looking at the data and saying, what does the data show? And not being closed-minded. And that goes both ways. Not being closed-minded, saying all vaccines are evil and bad, and not being closed-minded and saying all vaccines are great. Because you know what? Secretary Kennedy's right. Some of these vaccines that we foist on the public, and I say we, I mean the medical establishment, foist on the public, have never been shown to be good and never been shown to be efficacious. The data is terrible.
Yeah.
There's others that is totally not true for. But we need to go back and we need to look at each of these studies and say, does this make sense? Is this something that we should be doing? And I would argue that some of these vaccines, absolutely not. So I'm not anti-vax. I'm not pro-vax. I'm pro-vaccines that work. Maybe that's a better way to say it. How's that?
Yeah. I've gone from being someone who stated repeatedly on this program that I'm not an anti-vaxxer to at a certain point saying, you know what, I'm an anti-vaxxer based on what I've heard on this program. And at a certain point, then I even crossed the next threshold, which is I'm a vaccine abolitionist at this point, based largely on what I've learned through reading the book Dissolving Illusions, which I think everyone should read. I think it's just an incredible book. And the history,
check it out.
Yeah, it's just a phenomenal history, very detailed, very well presented. And one thing I love that Dr. Suzanne Humphreys pointed out when she was discussing the book is she said when they released the latest edition, she was screening a lot of challenges to the scholarship. And she said, for the most part, most of the criticisms or things that were pointed out to her just really didn't stick. But there was a couple fine points where she actually, based on what was presented to her, went back and adjusted maybe a decimal point here or there or whatever. She made very fine corrections to the text out of integrity for her work. And she was pointing out that, believe me, the people pushing this whole narrative on you, they're not nearly as concerned about being accurate and truthful as I am. Dissolving Illusions. I look forward to having the co-author of that book, Roman Bistrianic, on the program at some point soon. But we have a caller on the line, and it's actually another Ron. We have Ronald F. Owens Jr. on the line from California. How are you, Ronald? Thanks for calling.
I know, Ron. How are you, Ron?
Good. How you doing, Dr. Ron? I just wanted to share this with you. I'm eating breakfast here with my dad, and his name is Ron. So there are three Rons. Yeah, I wanted to make a comment. With all due respect, Dr. Ron, I am opposed to all vaccines, and I note this particular interview that Dr. Sherry Tenpenny was interviewed by Laura Logan last November, episode 42. It's almost a 3-hour interview, and she just drops all kind of bombs regarding the basically her point is that all vaccines are not safe and not effective. That's not why I called, but I mainly called just to encourage you in the Lord, to strengthen you. It seems like that this situation is a lemon, and perhaps some lemonade can be squeezed from it, perhaps the exposure and so forth. So, it's just so outrageous what the government is putting you through, and how we have all kinds of examples with all kinds of officials who've done egregious, far worse things, and this is just an accident. This is just lawfare. It really is. So I have no question for you, but I just wanted to encourage you and thank you for standing tall and standing strong. And I pray a special prayer of protection over you, your wife, your kids, and your family. Thank you. And thank you, Jeremiah, for platforming him.
Absolutely.
Well, wow, that was really sweet. Thank you, Ron. That was very nice of you. I've known Ron. I was on a space a few months ago with Ron, and what a great guy. Thank you so much for saying that. To his point, though, I have 4 kids. My all of them had to go into therapy when this was going on. My wife's a physician. She treats children with cancer. We're not evil people. We're not bad people. I've never once thought of defrauding anybody in my entire life. Like, this came completely out of left field. And, I wouldn't even say that this is really a mistake. I mean, I think a lot of people say, oh, well, if it was just a mistake. It wasn't even that. I mean, the judge even said that, and I know Ron wasn't saying this, but I'm just saying, even the judge said that the evidence points to my interpretation being appropriate. So at worst, what this is just a billing dispute that the government feels that it should have, the Biden DOJ feels that it should have been one thing, and I said it should have been something else. That's not criminal. In what way is this fraud? Like, I don't even understand how they can claim that. But you know what? It ruins your life. They took away my practice. They destroyed my reputation. They've cost me my savings, my retirement, my everything I've worked for my entire life has gone because of what these people did. And it's unconscionable. And to Ron's point, like, there are thousands of people like me out there that the Biden Department of Justice went after for nonsense and weaponized. And, like, this is the most un-American thing imaginable. Using your own government against you. Like, it's horrific. Just imagine, listeners, the United States of America versus you. Imagine being put in that position. I mean, it's just, you can't describe it to people. It is the worst possible thing, other than maybe losing a family member, that I could ever imagine going through.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that my mind just cannot begin to wrap around, again, back to the 50 years penalty, 50 years in prison, it seems that other doctors were attacked, but it happened more in the context of threatening their licenses and that kind of thing. It strikes me that this is a clerical error at worst. It seems like there would be so many degrees of penalty before you would suggest someone with no criminal record would have to do hard time. I don't understand legally how a clerical error translates into a 50-year sentence. And isn't it true that that these cases of alleged fraud, that each one of them was tantamount to a $50 gain, basically, that they're saying you defrauded people of the equivalent of $250, which of course you didn't
exactly
even
right.
do that.
Break it down.
But in terms of how does $250 turn into a 50-year sentence?
Yeah, I mean, when you break it down, it's 5 counts, each one. Again, just to add to the craziness of this, the government, the Biden DOJ came in and said, Dr. Elfenbein is wrong. He's billing too high. They never, at trial, like, I'm not making this up. Like, you can look at the transcripts yourself. They're public information. The government never said why what we were doing was wrong, how what we were doing was wrong, or what the appropriate code should have been. As dumb as that is, how can they possibly claim a crime when they can't even define the crime in themselves? But that's what happened. And they never could say what was wrong, how it was wrong, or what the appropriate code should have been. They just kept saying he's a criminal and he's wrong. And, to your point, yes, it's $250. It's 5 counts. Each one is a real person, by the way, a real human being. And, a difference essentially of $50 per person. 5 times 50 is $250. It breaks down to a $250 billing dispute. And by the way, to your point, Jeremiah, there are so many levels of their own violations that they should have followed. They're supposed to make a phone call. They're supposed to do what's called a chart audit. If they really believe that there's a billing problem, they're supposed to ask for charts. And they're supposed to say, you see, I don't understand. I don't know if people understand this, but when doctors' offices bill for medical services, they don't send the chart. What they send is the patient's name and a bunch of codes. That's it. If the insurance company, Medicare or private insurance, whatever, has a question, they do what's called the chart audit, and they ask for 30 or 40 or 50 charts, whatever the number is, randomly selected, and say, we'd like to see these charts, please. That's what they're supposed to do, and they're supposed to have a conversation with you. They violated their own internal documents, their own bylaws. They didn't do any of that. They just indicted me.
Wow.
Again, their whole line of reasoning makes no sense other than when you look at it through the lens of weaponization. It's selective and vindictive prosecution for my exercising my First Amendment rights. That's exactly what this is. There's no question about it. And to your point, they went after other people, but for their licenses and stuff. But other people were not going on national news and saying the Biden administration is going to kill people, and people are going to die because of their stupidity and their mistakes. That's exactly what I said. And I think that there's vindictive prosecution here. They didn't like that.
Yeah.
I don't know any other way you can explain this. And the chief judge, I mean, the guy sat there through the entire trial, and he said this whole thing was crazy and ridiculous. And again, he's not some right-wing guy. He's not some crazy person. He's the chief judge of the state. He's a pretty well-respected man. And, for him to do that says a lot. And by the way, he overturned a jury conviction, which the jury can decide one way or the other based on a lot of reasons. It's not necessarily innocence or guilt. They may like the suit you're wearing, or they may like your lawyer better than the other lawyer, whatever. But when the judge does it, it means there really was no evidence, because that's his job. He understands, the whole thing is, looking at the evidentiary line, is there enough evidence to convict? And he said no, because they didn't present any evidence. So it's more impactful when the judge does it than when the jury does it.
Yeah. So we have less than 10 minutes here. We have maybe a little over 5 minutes remaining. What can people do to support your legal defense, or what can people do in general to support you in this critical time?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you asking. So I'm facing a new trial, and I'm just I think the Trump people just, they're caught in a bureaucratic mess. And I don't think the Trump people are really aware of what's going on. I think if they were, Donald Trump's life was saved by monoclonal antibodies. He was one of the first people in the country to get them. And I think if he knew what was going on, he'd be like, this is crazy, shut this down. So a couple things. People can have a website. It's www.dropthecase.com. Please go to my website. Read about my case. You can email me. You can reach out to me. There's a Give, Send, Go on the website. If you can afford to give, please do so, because this really nearly bankrupted myself and my wife. And thank God my wife is still able to take care of kids with cancer, because if not, we wouldn't have a roof over our head and our 4 kids would be living on the street. So please help support that in that way. You can follow me on X, Ron Elfenbein MD on X, and if anybody knows someone in the Trump administration, please reach out to them. Anybody. Send them a letter. Send them a phone call. Or call them, email them, whatever. Todd Blanche, the acting attorney general, he has the authority to make this go away right now. So please send him a note, send him a message, say this is crazy. The Trump administration needs to stop this.
Yeah,
I just don't think they know what's going on.
Yeah, I don't think they do. And I think Ronald F. Owens Jr. made a great point, and I hope and I think that he is correct, which is that this case can be used to educate the public. Unfortunately, it was done at your expense and the stress that you and your family have endured. But I can't imagine this absurdity being carried forth, and hopefully it can be used to alert people to some of these systemic problems. And I guess maybe we could touch on that in the next couple of minutes, in terms of what is happening to the medical profession at this point. I mean, that's a kind of not a great question for the end of the show, because we could talk about that for another hour. But it just seems that physicians are not given the discretion that a physician should have to make real-time decisions to save and heal their patients. It just seems that they are now being reduced to functionaries in a machine. What's happening that could even have led up to this event?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great way to put it, functionaries in a machine. I will say, my story is sad and my story is terrible, and my story, as you said, is a lesson for everybody out there. I think that was the point of the Biden DOJ coming after me. Don't step out of line. Don't question the narrative. But the problem is, yes, I face all this horror and jail and whatever, but it's what happens during the next pandemic, whether it's a naturally occurring pandemic or a, quote, plandemic, it doesn't matter. We know it's going to come because we're a globalized society. It will happen. But why would anybody put themselves in a position like I did, going out there, doing the right thing, taking care of people, when they're going to throw you in jail? And why would anyone speak out against the narrative? Nobody would. So, that's why people should care about this. And to your point and your question, Jeremiah, it's really, I think medicine is one of the last remaining, or at least it used to be, very noble pursuits in life. There's a bunch of them. I'm not just saying medicine, but in my mind, it was one of the last that had really been left alone, if you will. I mean, yeah, the government encroached on it and all that, but it was still, up until COVID, was still something that I thought was very noble and was just a great thing. But now they've completely bastardized it to the point where you are right. Doctors are really just functionaries of the machine. Do what you're told. Do what we tell you to do. Don't question anything. Don't question the narrative. Even to the point of, I work in the emergency room. All right. Everything that I do is now boiled down to, essentially, did you follow the protocol? You have chest pain. There's a protocol for chest pain. You have pneumonia. There's a protocol for pneumonia. It doesn't matter. Whatever the ailment is, you're supposed to follow a certain protocol. And if you don't, you get in trouble. And that's a horrible way to practice. But that's what medicine has been reduced to. And it's awful and it's terrible. And we need to go back to having some degree of autonomy, not just on the physician's part, but on the patient's part. Like, you as a patient should be able to ask your doctor, why are you doing this? Why is this my only option? Why is vaccine the only option here? With the hantavirus, thank God it didn't become, knock on wood, didn't become much of anything. I think they were trying to just make it into scare the crap out of people. But, I kept saying, look, they're going to making a vaccine. And guess what? Pfizer or Moderna announced we're making a vaccine for hantavirus. And guess what? Their stock price jumped 20%. But you know what they didn't publish? 2 monoclonal antibodies were being looked at, and we're in clinical trials because there's no money in it. But you know what? That would be the cure for hantavirus. But nobody cares because that's not what's going to make Big Pharma money.
Right.
So, we've been pushed. You're absolutely right. We're functionaries of a machine, and that's awful, and it's terrible. You look at teachers. Same thing with teachers. There's no autonomy for teachers anymore. You got to teach by what we want you to teach, by what the machine tells you to teach, not by what you think you should be teaching or what the curriculum teaches. It's what does the machine want.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a terrible way to live.
Yeah, it is terrible. And We are out of time, but that's a powerful note to end on. Everyone, please go to dropthecase.com. Help spread the word about the plight of Dr. Elfenbein. He's a good man, and this is a total outrage what's happening to him, and more people need to be aware of this. So please help spread the word. Please join us on End All Tyranny tonight, and we will be back next week. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Have a great weekend. Peace and love. Take care. Thank you, Dr. Elfenbein.